Hello, all you people taking Theory 1, and welcome to the first video of this quarter. We're going to be talking today about the staff and about clefs. Now, some of this stuff is reviewed for you, and some of it's going to go too fast for some of you. If you don't have the background and you need help, please let me know, because I'm happy to do lots and lots of office hours using Zoom or FaceTime. So, anyway, we're going to assume that you know certain things. Like, we're going to assume that you know that the letter names go from A to G and then start up again. And an octave means if I go an octave higher, I go to the same letter name. So if that's a B, we go up to the B. If it's octave down, I go down to a B. We'll assume you know those basic things. If I assume wrong, let me know. Now, here's our staff. And our staff is 5 lines, 4 spaces. And it's supposed to tell us something. And what does it tell us? Well, I put a note on it. I don't know what note it is. But I do know that it's got to be a white key on the piano because there's no sharps or flats, nothing else. So that's a white key. And I know that if I go to the next space, I'm going up in pitch by 1 white key, 1 step. Or to the right on the piano, going up. And if I go from a space to line, going up, same thing. 1 step, 1 white key on the piano. And if I go back the other way, I go down. That's all. So all I have to know is what that first note is, and I know everything from the staff. Now, the book you have discusses this, but I don't think it does a really great job. That's why I'm reviewing it. I'm not going to go over everything in the book and these lectures, but I do want to go over stuff that I think there are other ways to look at. So they talk about the G clef, and they mention that the G clef looks like a G, which is true, but unimportant. The reason it's called a G clef is because, and I'll draw a bad one here, the little curly Q goes around the G above middle C. Now the middle C, I think you know this, if you look at a piano, there's usually some writing right in the middle, and there's 2 black keys, and the one just below that is middle C. And then there's 3 black keys, then 2 again. So that middle C, this is the G above middle C. And if we use this clef, the treble clef, then we know that that's a B, because if that's a G, A, B. We can figure out any note once we name one. This is not the only G clef. In the olden golden days, there was a G clef that looked like this. You don't have to know that clef because you see right there, the clef goes around this line. That you'll only see if you have sort of an antique, like 19th century French opera score. They use this clef a lot, but most editions, modern editions, have changed everything to treble clef. But the one that you will need to see is this one that has a little 8 down there. I think the book refers to it later on as octave treble clef, but I call it the choral tenor clef because this is the clef that you put tenors in. And that little 8 means that everything's an octave below where it's written. So instead of that being the B above middle C, that's now the B below middle C. And this is important because if you have a choral book and the soprano's written here and the tenor's written there, you might think, oh, the tenors are higher than the sopranos, but they're not. The tenors are down an octave. So if you're going to do any choral conducting ever in your life, whether it's going to be elementary school choir, well, they don't have tenors, high school choir, college choir, or church choir, amateur choir, get together and sing, you have to know this clef as well, which is the treble clef down an octave, or the vocal version of tenor clef, not the instrumental version, but the vocal version. So there's 2 G clefs you have to know. They at least have the same names on the lines and spaces, but one's an octave below. Then there's the F clefs. So if I'm in treble clef, it's B, C, D, right? But the most famous of the F clefs is the bass clef. And the book says that looks like an F. They're nuts. The reason that's an F clef is those 2 dots surround the F below middle C. That's why it's an F clef. And so that's the F below middle C. There are other F clefs. The book shows you briefly the baritone clef. You'll, again, only see that in 19th century French opera. That's really rare. You don't have to learn it for now because you probably will never see it. If you do, you can figure it out. That's an F. You can figure it out. But the bass clef looks like this. And now instead of B, C, D, that note is the D below middle C. I can count down. Well, there's F, E, D, and then it's D, E, F. Again, we know all the notes. We just have to know what the clef is. That tells us. Now, those are the 2 clefs you think that you need to know, but there's actually another set that you really need to know to be a musician, and that's the C clefs. The C clefs look very fancy when you print them, but when we write them, we usually just write as a K. When you print, these things curl around and all that stuff, And the C clefs tell you where middle C is. That's middle C in this clef. This is called alto clef. You say, why do I need to know alto clef? Well, you need to know alto clef because violas almost always play an alto clef. Until you get quite good and you shift high, then you sometimes go into treble clef. But in elementary school, junior high school, most college parts, even most professional parts, string quartet parts, they're all in alto clef. So you might find yourself suddenly teaching in a school system that they give you orchestra. You got to read the alto clef. You got to be able to call the notes by the right names. Or you've got a church choir, maybe as a side job, and you've got a string quartet in your church that wants to accompany your church. Viola parts could be an alto clef. You're going to run into alto clef. You're going to need to know it. And it's not hard. That same circle is now a C. It's middle C. C, E, E. You can figure it all out once you know. Now, that's not the only C clef you need to know. That's the most common one you're going to run into because it's every viola part. Anytime you have a string quartet or orchestra, it's there. But you also get this one. There it is again, little K. This one, the top line, that's middle C. This is called tenor clef. This is the instrumental tenor clef as opposed to the vocal or the choral tenor clef. And now this is an A, because C, B, A, so it's A, B, C. Again, you can figure it out. It's not hard. Tenor clef, if you're doing elementary school or high school or even band music, you probably will never run into tenor clef until about high school on cellists. When cellos start to go up the neck of the instrument, they go high, they write it in tenor clef. Trombones in an orchestra are very frequently in tenor clef, even to this day. So if you've got a church choir, and you're doing Messiah, and you're doing the big 19th century orchestration, not the original, the trombones in that are in tenor and alto clef. So you have to read it to be able to do a church choir at Christmas time, if you're going to look at the orchestra parts. Again, when the trombonist says, is it an A or an A flat, and you look at the music and you can't read the clef, that's a problem. So you have to know this, but you don't have to know it well right now. If you run into it, you can practice it, but just know that that C is now middle C. The other one that you'll only run into if you're a scholar, but you do see it occasionally, is this one, and that's soprano clef. Bach wrote in soprano clef frequently. Beethoven wrote soprano clef. Most of this music has been transcribed into treble clef, but not all of it. And sometimes you're going to run into it, you're going to have to read it. But again, that's middle C. You can figure everything out. That's pretty rare. You may not run into it, you may. But alto and tenor, you've got to know. So then, all right, so you can read this stuff, you can figure it out, but you can't read it fast yet. One of the problems is that you throw a chord up there, and if you have to count every note, it'll take you forever to figure out any chord or anything. We have to learn fast. And the secret, of course, is practice. This is music. It's all about practice, 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 practice. So what happens is at first you're bad at it, and it's frustrating. And then you're bad at it, and it's frustrating. And then you're bad at it, and it's frustrating. And then you're bad at it, and you're frustrating. And then suddenly you're good at it. And you don't even know when the change happened, but you can read. So you just have to practice. And there's lots of ways to practice. You could sight read. You could look at music and look at it. You can do flashcards. But there's also some mnemonics that really help. So I'm going to go over them. You may know them, but let's just go over them. If I'm in the treble clef, take my word for it, that's a treble clef, that the spaces spell face. They spell face. How easy is that? F-A-C-E. Spells face. So now you can look, okay, what's that one? A. What's that one? E. Sure, it spells face. The lines, they don't spell anything. But we have mnemonics for it. So there have been lots of these through time, and they're different in England than they are in America and so on. But the one I use is every good bug does fine. Every good bug deserves favor. Every good bug deserves fudge. I don't know. You can make up any one you want, but every good bug does fine. It's pretty standard nowadays. And that will give you all the lines. So pretty quickly you say, oh, what's that one? Well, every good boy. That's a B. Every good bug does. D. Excellent. Bass clef is not much harder. Let's do a bass clef. The space is here. A, C, E, G. Oh my gosh, it doesn't spell anything. But A, C, E, G, all cows eat grass. All cows eat grass. Now you know them all. Third one, all cows eat. E. Perfect. The lines are not very different from treble clef. G, B, D, F, and A. You notice that this looks very close. If we had an E down here, it would be every good bug does fine. So instead we say good bugs do fine always. Good bugs do fine always. This is bass clef lines. Piece of cake. Piece of cake. Now if we go into alto clef or tenor clef, you have to make up your own. They're not quite as obvious. So, but I'll just show you what you might be able to make up. That's a G, B, D, and F. So good bugs do fine are the spaces. Again, we already have the mnemonic. Just have to know the first one's a G, and then the lines are, let me see why I say that was a G. It's an F, A, C, E, and then G. So it's face plus G. I mean, you can come up with these. You don't have to memorize this one. We're not going to work that much in it. We'll work a little in it. You can always figure it out. We're not going to have so many exercises. It's going to take you forever. Now, there's one last thing. The staff's got 5 lines. Once upon a time, it only had 4. They added 5 because actually you can have as many as you want. There's no reason. There's no magical reason to have 5, except if you have 6 lines, it's really hard on the eyes. It's very hard to realize. Am I in the middle? So 5 is the one that's easiest to see. So we use 5. But sometimes we run out of stuff. Like I'm in treble clef here. And I got a C, and then I got a D, and then I got an E, and then I got an F, then I got a G. Well, I've got to be able to go up to an A. I mean, music doesn't stop. So it's like there's this other line up here. But we don't write that 6th line because it would confuse us. So what we do is we write the note on the line, and we put just the part of the line we need. We know that. It's called a ledger line. And then you can have a little ledger line with a B. You can have 2 ledger lines for the C, and 2 ledger lines for the D, and 3 ledger lines for the E. And that way, we have all these other lines, but we don't draw them so we don't get confused. We just put them when we need them, and we call them ledger lines. Now, what's nice is, if I come down to one ledger line here, G, F, E, D, C, middle C is one ledger line. If I come up, F, G, A, B, C, middle C is one ledger line. So these 2 things together, whoops, I drew that badly. They really go well together because one ledger line left, one ledger line down, both are middle C. So this is called the grand staff. Pianos plays grand staff, harp plays grand staff, marimba plays grand staff. If you don't have the pedals, the organ plays grand staff, harpsichord grand staff. Much music is written in the grand staff. So this is what you want to spend most of your time learning to read, the grand staff, the bass and the treble together as one big staff. And if you do that, you have mastered the writing of pitches and notes. We'll talk about rhythm another time. All right, thank you. I'll see you shortly.